It is absolutely critical that if we want a real future that really impacts people, our environment, what we do, we have to know where we are now. We have to have our feet firmly planted in reality to absolutely impact the future well.
I'm Dr. Louise Massara, and this is the Future Health Podcast. Today, we're privileged to be joined by the 2024 Australian of the Year, Professor Georgina Long AO. Georgina is the Medical Director of Melanoma Institute Australia and Chair of Melanoma Medical Oncology and Translational Research. She leads an extensive clinical trials team and laboratory with a focus on targeted therapies and immuno-oncology in melanoma. She is Principal Investigator on Phase 1, 2 and 3 clinical trials in adjuvant and metastatic melanoma, including trials in patients with active brain metastases. In today's conversation, we'll explore the interplay of creativity and evidence, the challenges and opportunities of being at the forefront of cancer research, and life balance when your goal is changing the world. Welcome, Georgina.
Thank you.
In the research that I've done, a little bit of reading about you, I noted that you were actually initially enrolled in a science law degree, if I've got that right. And that made me wonder what some of the world problems you might have wanted to solve as a teenager might have been.
That's a really interesting question because, in truth, when I was a teenager, the sort of problems, I actually grew up in the 80s, the sort of problems we were dealing with at that time were several-fold. Number one, we were still at the tail end of the Cold War.
I was building a bunker, so yeah. Right.
I love that creativity.
Yeah.
We were just entering or coming out of actually entering in the late 80s a major financial crisis across the world. Mm-hmm. And also we were talking about the environment, at least I was. So there were three major things as I grew up as a teenager that were causing us teenagers a bit of concern and anxiety. For me, the thing that gave me the greatest fear was the environment, actually. We knew about global warming at that time. We had the stats. So for me, that was actually burnt into my brain as a teenager and has always been a passion of mine, and it was a concern back then.
So was it environmental law? Was that the sort of angle at that stage, or...?
At that age, finishing school, I was not that strategic.
No, okay.
I was passionate. So I often would make decisions based on what I was enjoying at the time and what I thought I could make a difference in. And at that age, you also haven't learned a lot, you haven't lived a lot, you haven't experienced a lot, so the world's your oyster. And I didn't have any sort of limitations on what I could or couldn't do. So at that point, I just followed my passions in a very basic way, really, because it wasn't that, things were complicated, but I hadn't had enough lived experience.
Do you think, in essence, you're still that person then driven by your passion, or do you think, do you think more in sort of 10-year strategic plans now?
At my essence, I'm still that passionate person with some strategy now, with a lived experience, with methods on how to make passions come alive. But at the heart of it, it's still passions that are actually built in science and evidence every time. I look in the mirror and then get surprised that I don't see that 18-year-old face anymore. Right. But that's certainly how I feel inside, the same level of passions, but definitely more experience, lived experience, much more maturity and reality.
I mean, you've lived an adult life where you've obviously had a whole series of quite brilliant ideas. And I wonder, when you reflect back, what do you think was your first great idea?
That's a difficult question. What was my first great idea?
And it might be that, at the time you didn't even recognise it.
Well, that's the point, actually. It's only recently that I've even considered myself someone who has creative ideas. But I look back and I realise there have been creative ideas after creative ideas, but I had never seen them in that way. And part of that was growing up in a world as a woman, particularly. Mm-hmm. We are, when I say we, I mean society, and this is grounded in evidence. This is not something I've just made up. This is grounded in evidence that women work hard and genius is an attribute of men. And that's psychologically well documented. And I think that really is very pervasive. So it took me a long time to realise, actually, that idea was creative, that etc. And the women around me similarly have incredibly creative ideas. In fact, people have creative ideas. So when I think back, I think of the creative play. I was always a very happy kid, never bored, always thinking up things to do, never had a minute to myself. I think that's part of my personality. I'm just creative in terms of how to use your time. So even now when my children say, oh, I'm bored, I don't understand that. That's your problem. But in terms of an idea that's had impact, even actually in my 20s, in my postdoc studies where I went to the US, at Scripps Research Institute, in the chemistry department there, I was trying to design drugs that would form nanotubules across cells to kill cells in a very specific way. So that was sort of personalised cancer treatments. That was in the 90s. Those ideas were completely my own. In terms of the nanotubular structure was the expertise of the group I was working within, but to make it medical was my idea and how we would do that. And then more recently, the trials I've done in brain metastasis, particularly melanoma. And we forget this, but when I started out as a medical oncologist, that's what I am, a medical oncologist, translational researcher, the idea to do a trial completely in patients with melanoma that had spread to the brain, using these novel therapies at an early stage, at what we call a first-in-human stage, it was not being done. And designing those trials where you had no template and pushing colleagues, but importantly, other drug developers, so where the molecules are coming from, biopharmaceuticals, to do these trials was where I really hit my stride and my passion came through. And so a number of trials in melanoma have really shown not only do these drugs work where you have melanoma that's spread to places like the liver, the lung, the bone, but also when it's spread to the brain. And patients where it spreads to the brain usually survive 16 weeks. I'm talking multiple melanoma deposits in the brain. So the first was targeted therapies, and then the second trial, which has actually changed practice overnight for melanoma back in 2018, but also a lot of other cancers, was immunotherapy in melanoma that had spread to the brain. I'm very proud of that work, which was particularly Australian. Yeah. So these are the ideas that they're built on, ideas come from incremental changes prior to your own work.
Sure.
And it's the next leap. That's
absolutely.
all.
And really that was my next question. Do you see any tension really between creativity and following the evidence? And, how do you make that leap in hypothesis? There's such a definition to the steps of the world in which you produce your creativity.
So that's a really important question. And that's grey. But you must be founded in evidence. You absolutely must, because that's how you can do harm. You have to have some requirements about what you do and generating new evidence. So the question is, how do you generate new evidence for creative ideas when you're sitting on a pile of evidence that may restrict what you can do?
Yeah.
And it's pretty simple, and that is you have a hypothesis, you endeavour to gather the best evidence that supports that hypothesis. It may not be in humans, and then you embark on proving that hypothesis. It's not like saying, oh, I have an idea, I think this, acacia, blah, 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 let's choose a species, has a chemical in it that on the Petri dish has killed cancer cells, I want to put it straight in humans. Mm-hmm. That's just crazy town.
Yeah.
I see this acacia with this chemical and its structure is this. And it has a similar structure to this, and we know it can bind in this pocket of this kinase in this protein, and I've seen that it kills cancer cells on this Petri dish, but now I want to do the functional work to understand how it works in the lab. I've shown that it's got really good activity there. We're now tested in humans, it's safe, and it really might work in this disease, which has this. It's a stepwise process that's creative at every step of the way. And it's about providing the circumstantial evidence that may not be in humans, for example, to make that leap into humans. And that's important. We have to have that infrastructure, particularly in this world where truth is obscured.
We're going to get to that. But I want to ask you, and I think I know where you're going to go with this one, but I think the frustration for lay people, they hear about a potential breakthrough or a piece
Which is often exaggerated.
Which is often exaggerated. But then that it may be multiple years, it may be 10 years, it may be decades before we really are in a position where an idea has come all the way through to be a therapeutic opportunity, intervention.
It should not be shared widely at that very, very early juncture.
Okay.
Because of those issues, there's this focus on emotional attachments, exciting people, but why? If it brings support, if it brings good infrastructure, if it brings funding to make ideas be understood, to take them to the next level, fine. But to just be out there, to talk about an idea because we want likes, inappropriate.
Are there any rules or steps that are currently in existence in the clinical research space that it is time to reflect on with a view to bending or breaking or reconsidering?
I am very proud of Australia and what we have here. There have been incredibly great initiatives, but we're a small country with a small population relative to other countries in the world, and so it may not be appreciated, some of the good things we have. For example, in the clinical trial space, which is my expertise, the Eastern Board single ethics approval for trials in humans makes a lot of sense. It's very efficient.
Right.
We then have to ask, what are the barriers there? Well, sometimes it's certain ethics committees and how they function and what are the questions they're being asked, and they're asking investigators questions that are nonsense, etc. But on the whole, I think the ethics committees we have are fantastic and ask the right questions because there's a lot of thought and structure about what takes up, what is needed in a committee to approve an idea to be tested, for example, in clinical trials.
Sure.
So I think we've got a few great structures in place. I'm talking but now about Australia.
Yeah.
We also have a wonderful structure with the Therapeutics Goods Association, for example, in my area of cancer, where if you have a clearly terminal illness, you can have drugs that are investigational that have some evidence.
Yep.
Not zero evidence, some evidence. It might be very early evidence if you are facing death. There are not many countries that have that. People don't know that.
No, I didn't know that, yeah.
So we do have ways to do that. However, what we don't want is every little idea where people don't realise they're going to be doing a lot of harm going through that channel. And so there are checks and balances. Things have to have a sensible approach. They have to have safety. They have to have some good scientific hypothesis around it. It can't be that you have disease X and all of a sudden you've thought that cockatoo poo is going to work on it and you have a little bit of safety in, I don't know, primates, and we're going to do this for this. That's just not appropriate. So there are structures around it, but there is a path if needed. But it is a path that requires some form of evidence, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I do want to give Australia a pat on the back for that. So we have ways around it, but there are rules that need to be bent. But on the whole, my experience has been that the system allows for appropriate moving forward, I'm going to say.
Okay.
It's often the people who interpret the rules.
Okay.
And that's why you build around you teams of people who are smart, understand their experts, understand the goals, and can work within the framework. Because my experience is you can get things done. It's people and their interpretation and fear. Fear drives barriers. And often that comes down to people's risk appetite and also people understanding the risk they're taking and having some expertise with the drugs. So I think the frameworks are fine in there. It's the people interpreting the frameworks. And sometimes in bureaucracy, there are too many departments or people, and left hand doesn't talk to right hand. And so things that could get through don't, or they're not thought about.
Well, it must be very challenging when you're at the very forefront of anything to find enough collaborative experts to play that role of devil's advocate or sort of safety monitor, if you like, because the reality is there's a handful of people that are playing in this space, and so I can see how you describe the people as the potential barriers.
Absolutely.
Do you ever see a future where we will be doing clinical trials that aren't on humans, or clinical trials on genetic material that we've produced that eliminates the risk to living humans?
That's a lovely idea.
Yeah, well...
I mean, I think ultimately the end point will be to test in humans. But how that's done and what gets us there so that the framework of testing in humans becomes smaller or surrogate endpoints so that it becomes more efficient and quicker. I think what you describe is testing in other models or other ways could be done better to make the human testing more efficient in smaller numbers of patients.
I want to ask you about, cancer treatment is one of the environments that has the most sophisticated multidisciplinary approach to care. We think a lot here about workforce of the future, and I'm interested if you have any views on whether you feel there will be new components or members of that multidisciplinary team as we sort of look to the future, that we really need to be thinking about now to breed them, prepare them, grow your pipeline.
A really important aspect of multidisciplinary team is thinking about the gaps and how we need to fill them and what that future looks like. And you're right, cancer multidisciplinary team care is well advanced, but there are some multidisciplinary teams and there are others. One area I've already seen in my area of melanoma and oncology is looking at the patient's phenotype and their tissue and including that. And in fact, recently, we've now formalised that in that every week at Melanoma Institute Australia, we have a very large multidisciplinary team meeting. It goes for 2 hours, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m, Friday morning. And when we present the patients, they're often complicated patients, the biomarker team are present and will present the matched immunotherapy platform results on that patient.
Right.
So that's a group now that are there.
Yeah.
They're the scientists, translational scientists that I work closely with. And that result is actually very comprehensive. It's multi-omics, it's proteins, it's DNA, it's RNA, and it presents the full picture of the patient's tumour along with their clinical picture. So that's now being implemented. Separate to that, we have, we've bandied around this word, a molecular tumour board, which people use and has been around for about a decade. But that is enhanced and gone up one more step, where we're including the clinicians and the scientists, but we're discussing more than just the DNA, genetic material. It's a whole microenvironment of the tumour and the clinical phenotype. So yes, we are including scientists, translational scientists, into the multidisciplinary team. That's one example. We have our radiologists, our pathologists. We now have really, really early stage clinicians, so dermatologists in melanoma, and really, really late stage clinicians like me, my medical oncologist, but we stretch the gamut. So yes, we do have imaging. AI is going to be important. So we can imagine a future where you have your pathologist and radiologist and the clinical data and your tissue data, and then an AI expert, it's coordinating that to spit out a result or an integrated result from all of that information to give a prognosis, one, which helps us decide on treatment. Is this something we can limit to surgery? Is this something that doesn't need surgery, we can just give drug? Is this something, et cetera, et cetera? So I see a world where we will have more integrated results, where we need experts from scientific field translational research, not necessarily clinicians all the time, and then experts with biostatistics or bioinformatics and AI presenting results as well to discuss.
You mentioned a little earlier this environment of misinformation, and I want to come back to that. I mean, this is the first time, at least in my living history, where really sort of scientific research has come under attack. I appreciate there have been other times in history where that has occurred. It comes also at a time when the general public's sort of insatiable requirement for the next piece of information or instant gratification and the like. So we have these two sort of pieces coming together. I'm wondering how you think about with your patients, how you keep them focused on the critical importance of evidence in a space where they are probably being inundated under a range of algorithms, with a range of sort of misinformation, disinformation, which is a significant risk of causing harm.
Another very good issue that's facing medicine is misinformation and managing that and the time required to managing that. Interestingly, in cancer is a disease of older people, although it does impact younger people, and melanoma.
Melanoma.
Australia's cancer is the highest incidence cancer in people aged 20 to 39 in this country. But young people don't get cancer, so we don't see the larger numbers of the older. So to be frank, we are only seeing pockets of that in the clinic at this point. It tends to be younger patients or younger family members of patients. But on the whole, there's still a deep appreciation of expertise.
So the trust is still well and truly there.
It is, but it is being eroded. At this point in time, that misinformation and untruths more come around that dopamine hit you were talking about. I've got to get the information I need, what's coming out next, what quick thing can I get to get that instant gratification? And that's very emotional, and people are looking for emotions. And so that's where a lot of disinformation comes from, just breakthroughs. You were talking.
Yeah.
And then that's not helpful, because something that is based in science, that is medicine, that gets dressed up as a breakthrough, that is misinterpreted as to where the ideas come from and how it's happened. And that then hits the clinic. That then comes round to the clinic, and patients come in saying, but we saw this and it was medical and science and it was this leading da-da-da-da. Why can't this be rolled out for everybody? That's the misinformation. Less so than the sort of, I use the word cockatoo-poo, but, oh, I did my own reading and this, they've said
I
this.
drink this special drink.
Drink this special da-da-da. There's a little more reservation about that with people in general, but it's more when medicine and science starts to become at that level. So that's the issue.
If we think about the potential positive of people's access to more information, it's got good and bad, right?
Yeah.
So yes, we're able to provide people a lot more information about their own health. They can become much more health literate than perhaps ever before. I reflect on your time as Australian of the Year and really playing a sort of a health advocacy role as well. In today's society, we have this moment, and fashion is ever changing, but right at this moment, agelessness seems to be priceless. We don't want any lines. There is a push to look young. I'm wondering how we can harness in the public health world or in our own sectors, how can we use these tools to our advantage? How do we say, okay, people are fascinated by this idea of agelessness. We don't want them in the sun. We've got a good public health message. Are we doing the best we can do to use the spaces where people are going to for their information to be clever about how we're targeting perhaps the behaviour changes we'd like to see, taking a marketing approach, if you like?
So now you're talking about another issue and saying, okay, in this world of misinformation, we've got this structure where it can be really helpful and useful. We can communicate much more quickly, efficiently. We can get work done more efficiently. I don't know about that because my email inbox is just terrible. But how can we use it? And certainly in prevention of skin cancer, as an example, is a beautiful one. Seatbelts would be another one. Alcohol and drink driving is another one. There are a whole host of life being at norm. How could that be reinvented this day and age?
Now we're showing our age.
I mean, the 80s were a fabulous decade for these great public health campaigns. We had Life Be In It, we had Kiss a Non-Smoker, Enjoy the Difference, we had Slip, Slop, Slap, there are a whole heap of things that were wonderful but not sustained. So yes, that's where we can use social media. We can use social media influencers or social in a number of ways. The agelessness one and the skin one is a fantastic one for melanoma and skin cancer because there is an obsession with looking young. And the truth is, sun and UV ages you, full stop. and it also causes skin cancer. So yes, we did that as Australians of the Year, and even prior to that, when my co-medical director at the time, Richard Scollier, and I spoke on the National Press Club in 2022 about sun safety, we called out TikTok, for instance, and social media influencers, and we're talking about a tan is an SOS from you. It's bad, basically. So if you see a tan, that means your skin cells are in trauma. And TikTok answered. And for that summer, over 22, 23, created a tanning that's cooked that came up every time you searched beach, tan, swimming, sun, summer. That came up, tanning, it's cooked, with information about skin cancer. That's very powerful in terms of public health campaign. So yes, we can use social media for good, and that's how we should be using it.
Do you think there's a genuine tension between hope and evidence? That might seem a bit weird, but I think about the cancer patients looking to a whole range of modalities to support their cancer journey. And I wonder how you, coming from a very scientific perspective, how you help thread the needle with your patient community.
Hope is critical in everything we do, not just in a cancer
human
journey.
Experience.
Yeah, it's every human experience. Cancer is one aspect of that, really. We have to remember cancer is the biggest cause of death in the Western world, in Australia, but it applies across the board. Any challenge humans have, hope. Your experiments aren't working. You're banging your head against a brick wall. You're a PhD student. Hope that the next one will work. Hope that I can keep going. You have a drug that you're working and then the phase 3 fails. Hope that the next one. So it's not unique to cancer.
Yeah.
It's something we as humans live with. And so threading that needle is actually human. And I do it every day. I see about 80 to 100 patients a week, and that's my job. But to link it to evidence, so give real hope is my job. That's what I like to do. And so it's a very easy link. You have your drugs that will or won't work if you're doing clinical trials. You're giving someone hope. They walk out of your door with a hope. But when there are no more treatments left, then the hope becomes different. I hope I can see my long-lost brother who's in Queensland coming down to see me before I might go. I mean, I know that sounds...
No.
But it's a journey, but hope at every step of the way. It's not just hope that I will get a drug that will work and cure me. There's lots of little hopes of different things, and it's about managing those expectations and talking about that human spirit. And at times, people have unrealistic expectations, and that's about talking and managing and communicating about those. One thing that we as humans could do better is putting our feet firmly in reality. And that comes from childhood onwards. And I wonder, with this, the social media and all the impacts and being fed lots of images of what life's about, that we need to, as a society, be more attentive to what is reality and keeping our feet planted in reality. And it's not about dashing hope. It's about realistic, because that's how we live our lives. And we all have challenges. If you don't, you're not living, right? You're not.
Yeah.
And life is full of setbacks. That's what makes the joys. And so at the heart of it, whatever we do, whether it be translational research, basic research, this is in medicine, clinical research, or just clinical service, hope drives everything. But we have to have our feet based in reality at every step of the way.
So accepting that we need to stand firmly in reality, how can we at the same time launch ourselves into a future realities which is yet to sort of be discovered?
It is absolutely critical that if we want a real future that really impacts people, our environment, what we do, we have to know where we are now. We have to have our feet firmly planted in reality to absolutely impact the future well.
Women's work, particularly in the scientific fields, has historically been mislabeled, misattributed and the like, and you pointed to this a little bit earlier. How important is it for you to see yourself credited for the breakthroughs that you've made?
Critical. If we look at history, we have seen this time and time again for women. And it goes back to the idea I mentioned before about genius is a male attribute and hard work is a female attribute. That is so untrue and not grounded in evidence. Let's talk about evidence.
And reality.
And reality. But what does promote that is understanding where ideas come from and claiming that and not owning it completely, share it. People are very collaborative, but making sure that attribution is understood and not assuming these long-held biases comes down to unconscious bias about where ideas come from, which is, throughout history. Two good examples, I think, represent that. Rosalind Franklin, I always use this because people know about DNA, our genetic code. She was a chemist. Watson and Crick worked in the same field, exactly the same field. She had done a lot of work on the crystal structure of DNA and had the idea of a helix of some kind. And Watson and Crick used her data without her knowledge or consent and they were in the field and they were doing their own work, but they used her data that clinched the structure and they received a Nobel Prize and they were attributed with that creativity, which was hers. They may have had a little share in it, but hers was a massive part of it. That's not right. It's just not right. What does that say to other people, not just men and women, people about where ideas come from so that we get the best ideas, so that we get the best contributions from everybody? So that's a really important example of someone who was not attributed with her great ideas. And what does that tell a little girl like me in the 80s growing up about my potential to give ideas? If I'm seeing all the time men being given ideas, it means I can't do it. It means I won't share it. It means I might develop it, really. I have female children, so it's really important that they contribute to this world. It's about all of us contributing. Second one, Margaret Hamilton. She was the person that invented the concept of software and hardware. And she was the programmer for the software for the Apollo missions. Now, her work was often attributed to men. She's alive today, by the way. But there was another twist, and that was her work was often attributed to the team. Now, women aren't going to fight that, right? And you wouldn't. Yes, it is a team effort. But what about her expertise and leadership? Attribute it to Margaret Hamilton. Yes, the team helped, but she had the ideas and the leadership that brought the whole team. So it's Margaret Hamilton and the team. You will hear that said very frequently about our wonderful male colleagues who have ideas. Oh, he led a great team that did this. But I do not hear that much for females and women, and that has to change because I see it all around me, these people doing great things, who are leading, who are experts, and it's because of their leadership and experts that the teams then are able to contribute to that. And so I would like to see that change because then even more ideas and more solutions are solved. And that's the way it's got to be.
One of the exciting things about the future is there are no facts associated with it yet. And we can sort of live in this moment where the choices we're making today go some way to shaping the future that we will individually and as a society have in the future. If you could make one change today to move a step closer towards the future you hope to see for yourself and for your patients and your colleagues, what would that change be?
I think one big change would be dealing with the unconscious bias we all have on every level, I'm not talking just gender, that may hold us back, and being cognizant of that and having your feet planted in reality. That would be an enormous, important change. There are a few things that I have a framework around that, And I think this helps me think about that, because that's quite a nebulous thing to say, but say yes to opportunities. Often people talk about careers and plans of careers, etc., and having a set plan and sticking to it is actually not that helpful. Having an idea of where you want to be, but being open to opportunities is really important. And part of that is living in a world without unconscious bias, but say yes to things that attract you and excite you in terms of your work and productivity. Often people are worried about trying to fit it in. If I say yes, I won't fit it in, and then I won't be perfect, and then I'll fail. I think women suffer from that more. So getting rid of some of those preconceived ideas, unconscious bias, thinking big, and to be able to think big, we do have to remove those barriers and things like unconscious bias. Perfection is the enemy of the good. So learning to make mistakes and being proud of them and failing and making bad decisions so we can learn to make good ones, I think is really important. Of that, again, will feed into the unconscious bias if we allow that. Only if you have insight, though, and only if you make mistakes to be improved. You know, you can't just keep making mistakes and never learn how to make good ones. And that way then we can live a world where we progress, because we're not trying to be perfect, we're just trying to get the job done. And we will fail sometimes, but huge success will come of it, because perfection is the enemy of the good and it will hold us back. So I think a framework change in the way we think, and it has to start early on, and it has to be changing how we see each other. That's really important to me. But lastly, none of this matters if we don't have a planet. And so at the end of the day, we also have to look after our planet, because if we don't have a planet, and we're so used to hearing this, that this might sound old blah to some people, but at the end of the day, if we don't have a place to live, a planet, and respectful of all the living things on this planet so that we can survive, all of this doesn't matter.
Professor Georgina Long, what an inspiring conversation. Thank you for joining us at the Future Health Podcast.
Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of myself and today's guest, and do not necessarily reflect the position of New South Wales Health. Any content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be interpreted as endorsement or approval by the organisation. New South Wales Health does not endorse any products, services or companies mentioned in this content.